Yep, that's artifacting. I've been putting out subpar audio with my videos lately, and this isn't clickbait. And as of last week, I found myself staring down the barrel of an issue that seems so overwhelming, I didn't even know where to start. So let's go over what happened and what I was able to do to figure out what was trashing my audio. Kind of a peek behind the curtains into how you can troubleshoot your own problems and perhaps some of the issues and frustrations you can come across when you're doing it yourself. Specifically, if you're using Final Cut Pro anywhere in your workflow. So let's do this. Now, this came to light a couple weeks ago when I was in Las Vegas covering NAB, and a comment came in saying there were issues with the audio on my video of the Fafine Tank 3. The commenter was a touch brash and even a bit insulting, so I called up Dylan, gave him the complaint, told him what to listen for, and sent him off. By the way, if you don't know who I'm talking about, Dylan is kind of my audio Jesus, the absolute best ears I've ever known, and an absolute beast with audio. He is my go-to to solve issues and, frankly, troubleshoot issues. So then, I guess I should tell you what the issue was. Now, the complaint was that there was a chorus effect on my voice, and it was happening throughout the whole video. Again, I was in Vegas. I had no way of listening back on any gear worthy of critical listening. And this is kind of why I got passed off to Dylan. Now, something Dylan noticed at the time was a couple quirks. Now we have the Fafine Tank 3 versus the Mayono PD200X. I'm trying to stay right in between them. It was initially thought to be a point where I overlapped my audio during the comparisons. Dylan said he heard that, but wasn't really concerned. We moved on, and frankly, with everything happening, I completely forgot about it. Then last week I remembered the exchange, so I dropped in on Podcastage's Discord because I know that's where some of this discourse was happening. And what I found at first kind of irked me, because the original complainant seemed to be pretty bitter and was letting that show. So I called him out on it, and in true Discord fashion, we had ourselves a showdown. But during this, I was at the gym trying to work out. Now, I realized that part of the reason I couldn't understand his issue with my audio was that I didn't fully understand what he was expressing. Now, perhaps I thought there were others in the group that would be able to break it down better. So I had him tag people that also recognized it. And this is the point where we hit the nail on the head. Artifacting. Now, this was the word from a couple of the group, most notably a guy called Jackson535. Actually, I'm assuming he's a guy or she's, anyways. But again, at the time I'm at the gym and I wasn't really in a place to really sort this out. And honestly, when you self-assess your own audio, it can be kind of tough. So again, I called in Dylan. Remember, none of this has anything to do with pride. If this was an issue, it needed to be fixed ASAP. Now, the biggest problem here is audio artifacts can be created in a multitude of ways, and somewhere between the recording to the final export, there's a ton of things that can happen to your audio, so kind of the needle in a haystack thing to be sure. He sat down with the audio for a close, intimate listening session. He came back with, yep, that's artifacting. Now, let's talk about what artifacting is before we go all in on this. In the grand scheme of things, it's literally just sonic material that is unwanted in a recording. That's it. But there are people that like artifacts. For example, you know when people make a song that has that analog record player sound, all the pops and hiss? Well, that's literally intentional artifacting. Glitch music is another form of intentional use. But outside of some of those niche uses, well, most artifacting is bad news in audio. Generally speaking, it can happen in all manners of ways, from a bad interface, a bad cable or wire somewhere, electrical interference. Basically, what I'm saying is that the term sonic artifact is wide-reaching, and it covers everything to the dust covering your favorite vinyl. So, we got to work. Now, we did get lucky as the artifacting was happening mostly on my sibilants, so on my S sounds. Now, that meant we had a frequency range to pay attention to, but we still had no idea what stage of the process it was coming from. Now, some of the difficulties here was the fact that my voice is kind of unique and can give false flags as it is extremely quirky, and since my job for the past 12 years has been literally talking, vocal fry is also something that can be discounted as a problem as well. But if it wasn't me and my voice naturally making the sound, we had to consider the signal path the audio took from my mouth to computer. And well, that's could be any of the interfaces I use. Generally, my Rodecaster Duo is my go-to, but depending on what was set up for whatever test I was doing at the time, it could have been anything. DLZ Creator, Minifuse, Scarlett 2i2, AudioFuse Studio, Lewitt Connect 6. Literally nothing sits on my shelf for too long. I guess in retrospect, I should be keeping a list of what I use on each video. Consider that noted. But if that wasn't the issue, then there is the initial processing stage for the audio. And in review videos, I only use a mouth declicker on the audio aside from gain matching on the sources. Put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that in a bit. And lastly, you have the export stage for the audio, which is the final time that the audio gets produced. So it's not a small range of plausible culprits. Needless to say, the night after the live stream where we discussed all this, I didn't get a whole bunch of sleep, but I did wake up with a plan. You see, in all things troubleshooting, I was taught to work backwards, and honestly, kind of got lucky here. Now, I had an inclination that the issue was in the export, and that was because I think I would have noticed it in the edit. At least I think I would have. It is kind of tough because the edit has you so focused on the presentation and not so much the nuances of the audio. And it's not really easy to hear, which is why Dylan missed it the first time. You have to be paying attention, and critical listening is anything but casual. Anyway, so I went into Final Cut Pro. And well, would you imagine my surprise when I noticed that under my export settings, I see AAC for the audio. That is new. And even more new was the fact that I couldn't change it. I'm not sure when that happened. I mean, it seems ludicrous that you would export an H.264, one of the best codecs for video with the least amount of compression, only to send it out with audio no better than an MP3 rip. And again, I couldn't change it back. Now, when I set all this up when I first started running Final Cut Pro as an editor, I know I had that on Wave. But now, though, there was no way to default to Wave again. So I ended up having to do all this through Compressor, which is an add-on program that works hand in hand with Final Cut Pro and allows you to pick all of your settings. Not sure why that's a problem in Final Cut Pro, but here we are. Anyways, I export it. I send it to Dylan to be checked because I didn't trust my ears again, which is, I should say, an interesting point I should talk about. It can be really tough to be critical of your own audio, so having a second pair of ears is super important if you can do it. But at the time, Dylan wasn't awake yet, and honestly, I didn't know if the export was the only issue or if that was the issue at all. So I dove in. I went through every interface in this place, every cable. I recorded audio with everything. I was prepared to go through everything and find the weak link. I even swapped computer to computer and recorded over the 3 computers I own. A single cable or power supply can completely derail a whole setup. And when you have hundreds of cables and mountains of power supplies, well, it can be kind of overwhelming. Now, I was in the midst of all this when Dylan called me back and said the audio was better. A massive wave of relief, I gotta say. But he did preface it with it wasn't perfect. There were still a couple quirks that he couldn't nail as being part of my voice or something else that was part of my process. I was at a loss, and I figured that was how I was going to have to run things, at least until I could find the ghost in the machine. But then Bandrew reached out to me, and I got some interesting feedback from him. He exports his videos in AAC. Wait a second, if he does that, why was I running into the same issues? Well, earlier in this whole process, I was sharing some of the things I do to my audio, and it is pretty basic when putting together a review. First, I gain up the audio. Then, because I have misophonia, I run Isotope's mouth to click on it. I only do a light pass with it to get rid of the egregious offending clicks, so nothing really that should be picked up on at all. But again, I did say that Dylan still heard some quirks, only a couple throughout the whole video, but still, they were there, and you had to really listen for them, but they were there. So, my hypothesis is this. When I was exporting with Wave for my audio in my videos, with the declicker, it wasn't having any of the issues. Perhaps a quirk or two that could be passed off as anomalies. But if I were to export untouched audio in AAC, again, it wouldn't have been much of an issue. But when my computer threw me a curveball and I started exporting both, well, it seems that's when the issues started coming up, and this is interesting. So I'm releasing this video without a mouth declick, and I'm curious what the thoughts are going to be on the final quality of the audio. This is going to be really hard for me to edit, just so you know. But this whole thing also has me really considering the impact this has had on me. This could have derailed the channel for some time, but it also gave me some perspective on just how much more is on the line as this channel gets bigger. Also, what's at stake as well. And perhaps this is my first chance to get glimpses on what might be the challenges of growing on YouTube, and I have a few thoughts. There needs to be more of a system in place to make sure this stuff doesn't happen, and that's what I'm working on now. Of course, there are going to be hiccups when you completely change your workflow, as I did moving over to Mac just randomly. But that's no excuse for a lack of systems. So then, I guess I should end with this. If you hear something that doesn't sound right in my video, don't hesitate to let me know. Of course, I do have the Discord channel linked below. My Discord channel, that is. Now, I do enjoy visiting Bandrew's channel, and it's fun, but I don't want to be digging for my own problems on there. If I'm not part of the conversation, it can be hard to get fixes done. And I guess I'll try to be a little less sandpapery in my replies. All around, though, I'm glad we got this stuff done now, because we have some pretty big projects coming up, and they can't be anything but perfect. So, with that in mind, cheers, guys. Thanks for watching.